All right, Larry Krueger here from the Pig and a Pickle Crew Show with a little 49er video. Who's going to get cut in July? And of that group, which of those guys may the Niners be interested in adding to their own 53-man roster? We discuss it next. But first, we're brought to you by Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. Check them out in Emeryville and Corte Madera. They're open 7 days a week from 11 a.m. till 8 p.m. or until they run out, and they do run out. So go say hi to Damon and Mary, get some brisket chili, and tell them that Larry Krueger sent you. And this video is brought to you by Sharp Corner Sports Cards and Collectibles. Check them out. They're at 205 Cypress Avenue in Pacific Grove, California, along the Monterey Peninsula. Call my good friend Anthony Catania. He's at 831-521-5264 for all your sports cards and collectible needs. All right. Well, this is a kind of the downtime between now and training camp. Right now, the Niners have a 90-man roster, and August 27th, they'll pare that thing down to 53 men and get ready for week one and their battle with the New York Jets to start this upcoming campaign. Really great article I read today in ArizonaSports.com. So, and it really is an interesting article. It's the kind of piece that guys like myself like to read this time of year. And it's entitled Potential Surprise Cut Candidates for All 32 NFL Teams Ahead of Training Camp. And it was written by a guy named Mike Payton just within the last day or two. And he goes through each team in the league or almost every team in the league and looks for a guy who he thinks is going to get cut. And maybe is going to get cut, or obviously guys who are on the verge of getting cut are also always trade candidates at the cut down if they're a little bit better than your normal player who might get paired off the roster at the cut down, if they have a little bit of, they've got a special trait or value, if they've got some upside potential, if another team comes wanting and has an issue where they need an extra wide receiver, and maybe somebody cuts a wide receiver because they have too many. I mean, NFL teams are not evenly distributed. The 49ers, for example, have George Kittle at tight end and a lot of question marks behind it. And you could make an argument that none of the guys behind him are really capable or worthy of being tight end 2 on this team. And yet, look at the 49ers at wide receiver. Debo, Ayuk, if they get him signed, Juwan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, Jacob Cowing. But that's just 5 right there. But you also have Chris Conley. You got Danny Gray. You got Tay Martin. You got, Trent Taylor. I mean, you got a lot of different guys who are competing for spots who may wind up getting cut or traded as the roster gets paired from 90 down to 53 on August the 27th. So let's take a look at this list and go through it a little bit. Now, the Niner they have potentially getting cut is Elijah Mitchell, and it makes sense. Elijah Mitchell is in a loaded backfield. The Niners just added Isaac Guerendo in the 4th round. They added Cody Schrader as an undrafted free agent. Both those guys, I think, have a great chance to make the team. You also have Mitchell and J.P. Mason. You got CMC. You got Patrick Taylor. You got Kyle Juszczyk. That's 7 right there, and odds are they're going to wind up keeping 5. So unless there's a couple of injuries that put guys on IR, the 49ers may be cutting a really good running back, or they may be trading one of their running backs. And this guy's guessing that Elijah Mitchell, Mike Payton is saying Elijah Mitchell is going to be the odd man out. Now, we'll see. Mitchell's is a personal favorite of Kyle Shanahan. Why? Because he's a really smart player. He almost always falls forward, and he never fumbles. So he's a great complimentary piece. Shanahan likes to use McCaffrey in the first half and use Mitchell to salt away games because there's very few negative yardage plays with Mitchell, and there's hardly ever any fumbles. So he's a great guy to finish with. So even though lots of people from afar look at Elijah Mitchell and say, superfluous piece or an extra piece, they don't need him. He's actually highly coveted by the coaching staff and Kyle Shanahan. So I'm not sure if Mitchell's going to be the back. It might be Mason, might be Guerendo, might be, could be Juice. I mean, you just don't know how the cut down's going to come and who's going to look good in the summer, who's going to get, hurt in the preseason, who's going to look good in the preseason. So a lot of factors involved here, but they list Elijah Mitchell as the Niner most likely to get cut. Now, there are some good players that are at positions the Niners don't need, guys. Like, for example, they say the Bears are going to wind up cutting Khalil Herbert. Khalil Herbert's a really good running back. And if the Niners weren't loaded at running back, I'd say, man, go sign him. But they just added DeAndre Swift. They have Roshan Johnson. And they think that there's a idea that Khalil Herbert could get cut. He's a back that, like, if you're Dallas, you would love to have Khalil Herbert. He was great at Vatech. He's a really solid NFL running back. Dallas doesn't really have any running back depth. So he makes sense for them. All right, how about guys who make sense for the 49ers? Let's look at some of those as well. The Bengals, they say, may cut edge rusher Joseph Asai, who played his college ball at the University of Texas. He had a disappointing 2023 season, and now they're saying he's on the roster bubble. They drafted Cedric Johnson out of Ole Miss in the 6th round. If he looks good in the preseason, they're saying Osai could become expendable as a high upside pass rusher who's never really fulfilled his potential. So Joseph Asai would be a really nice addition for the 49ers. He might be better than Drake Jackson. He might be better than Robert Beal. The Niners, have obviously Leonard Floyd and Nick Bosa, and they have Yatir Gross-Matos, but you probably want a couple more edge rushers. Maybe Drake's the guy, maybe Beal's the guy, but maybe they aren't. And if they aren't, Joseph Asai from Cincinnati would be a really, really good addition. A guy that's interesting player, but I don't think the Niners need him, is wide receiver Mac Hollins, who's now in Buffalo. Big wide receiver with good hands, former Raider. The Niners don't really need him. Philip Dorsett's an interesting receiver, burner. I don't think the Niners necessarily need him either. Kyle Trask, they're saying the Buccaneers may cut Kyle Trask. The quarterback, I don't think he's a fit for the Niners. The Cardinals may cut running back Michael Carter, who's a good player. Really liked him in college. But they have Trey Benson. They have DJ Dallas. They've got they obviously James Conner. So there's a very good chance that Michael Carter gets cut. I think there'll be a number of teams that are interested in him. Probably not the Niners because of their depth in the backfield. Isaiah Spiller could get cut by the Chargers. Once again, not necessarily a fit for the Niners. Chiefs may cut McCole Hardman, they say, who's a speedy wide receiver. If you're looking for vertical speed and you cut Danny Gray and you needed vertical speed, McCole Hardman might not be a guy for vertical speed. He runs in the 4.3s. Okay, here's a guy that might be a good fit for the Niners. Colts tight end Mo Alley Cox. The Niners have George Kittle. And after that, it's Logan Thomas, it's Mason Pline, it's Cam Latu, it's Braden Willis, it's Jake Tungs. It's guys who are more replacement level. The Colts tight end room is loaded. They've got Kylan Granson, Jelani Woods, Andrew Ogletree, Will Mallory, the former Hurricane, and now the veteran in the room is Mo Alley Cox. Mo Alley Cox is a very good player. Good size, good strength. I would say Mo Alley Cox would probably be automatically tight end 2 on the 49ers. So if he winds up getting cut, the Niners could have interest in Mo Alley Cox. I think he's a guy that absolutely would fit. Another interesting name, not that the Niners would have interest, but possibly, they're saying the Dolphins may cut Jeff Wilson. Jeff Wilson Jr. may be on the beach later this year. Now, if the Niners have an injury, if they're depleted somehow in the backfield, they're loaded now. And I can't imagine they'd be interested in Jeff Wilson, but he's a good running back. He's a good NFL running back. He's tough. Niners really like him. They say the Eagles may cut cornerback James Bradbury. I think Bradbury's at the end. I think he's lost a step. I really think that he backslid last year and he lost some of that explosive movement ability. So the Eagles have no faith in Bradbury. They drafted, Quinyon Mitchell. They drafted Cooper DeJean. They're going to wind up cutting James Bradbury, but I don't know that he's a fit with the Niners. One guy that I think is an absolute fit for the Niners is Falcons safety Richie Grant. Richie Grant has had some ups and downs so far in the NFL. He got off to a good start last year, and then DeMarco Hellams swooped in and took his starting job. And, I really like Richie Grant. I think Richie Grant was a really good safety in college. That would be a guy, if I'm the 49ers, I absolutely would be interested in. If Richie Grant is on the street, I'm signing him. Another guy that I think I would be interested in as a practice squad player at the least, and maybe a possession receiver, and he might be better than some of the Niner possession receivers, is New York Giants wide receiver Isaiah Hodgins, who's a Bay Area kid. He's from Walnut Creek. He went to Berean High School in Walnut Creek. Hodgins looked really good in the playoffs a couple of years ago. He's a big body. He's not a big special teamer, so that's why he may be on the bubble. They've got Gunnar Olszewski there, and they're thinking that maybe Hodgins doesn't make the roster. He's not a big return guy, but you're talking about a 6'4", 6'5" possession receiver with great hands who runs terrific routes. I mean, in a lot of ways, Isaiah Hodgins could be an ideal possession receiver, and I think he's got high-end potential. When I say high-end, I think he could be a possession receiver on a Super Bowl champion type team. I mean, he's very dependable. He's a big receiver with terrific hands. Doesn't separate great. There's definitely guys who run better. But, man, I'd be interested in Isaiah Hodgins if he was on the street, just because of his ball skills. A couple guys that I think are also really special. The Niners don't need a running back, but the Jets, they're saying, may cut Israel Abanaconda. And Izzy Abanaconda, if you remember him from Hard Knocks, he was the Jets' fifth-round pick. He was one of the darlings of Hard Knocks last year. And, the Jets obviously took Breece Hall, and then in this draft, they took Braylon Allen, and they also took Isaiah Davis from South Dakota State. So suddenly they're really, really loaded at running back. And, that leaves Izzy Abanaconda, plummeting down the depth chart. He got 0 reps in the OTAs with the first team or the second team. When he was on the field, he struggled. He had a bunch of nagging injuries last season. I love this player. I thought this kid was great at Pittsburgh. I think he's a tackle breaker. This is definitely a guy that I would want to sign. I like Izzy Abanaconda. I think Izzy Abanaconda may be better than Jordan Mason. He may be better long-term than Elijah Mitchell. I mean, he's a big, explosive back with a lot of speed and a lot of power. I really like him. To me, that's a guy that I absolutely would want. Another guy that is the Niners should have a lot of interest in is defensive lineman John Kaminsky, the Detroit Lions defensive end. Kaminsky, was a big part of the Lions roster in 2022. He came out of nowhere. He had a career year. They signed him to a multi-year deal, and then he struggled in 2023 to kind of recapture whatever it was that he had. He's not a pure pass rusher. He's more of a big-bodied guy. But if you look at the Lions, they added Marcus Davenport. They have James Houston now healthy. They was Mitchell Agude, the former UCLA player, was really surprising on the Lions spring practices. They're trying guys like Makai Wingo and Levi Onwuzurike. They're trying inside guys like that. They're trying those guys outside. And there's a potential that Kaminsky could get cut. And he's a high motor defensive end who gets after it. Now, he's not a true edge busting burner off the edge, but he's plays the run pretty well. And he's got a high effort, high motor. If somehow Drake Jackson and Robert Beal don't fire and Kaminsky gets cut at the cut down, absolutely, I'm bringing him in for a look. They say the Packers may cut A.J. Dillon. I don't think that's a fit for the Niners. The Panthers may cut Miles Sanders. I don't think that's a fit for the Niners. The Pats may cut Juju Smith-Schuster. I don't think that's a fit for the Niners either. The Raiders, though, may cut defensive tackle Matthew Butler. Butler's a very talented player. They just signed Christian Wilkins, and that pushes Butler further down the depth chart. He's a pretty good player. The Niners need an offensive tackle. They're saying the Rams may cut Joe Notaboom. Notaboom was given a 3-year contract in 2022. He was the Rams' choice to replace Andrew Whitworth, but it just never worked out. And then he played 59% of the offensive snaps. He lost his starting job to Alaric Jackson. And if the Rams decide to cut Notaboom before the last year of his deal, they would open up $5.6 million in cap space. There would still be a $6 million dead money cap hit, $10 million next year as a post-June 1st release. But they could move on from a relatively expensive player who has not performed to the level that they wanted him to. But Joe Notaboom, he might be better as a swing tackle than Jalen Moore. So the Niners may have interest there. So there's some interesting guys. Now, I'm leaving the two that I think are the most interesting for last. And that is, they're saying the Saints may cut the former Notre Dame defensive end, Isaiah Foskey. And this, to me, is really an interesting name. Now, I would trade probably a 5th or 6th round pick for Isaiah Foskey. I'm a big fan of Isaiah Foskey. He attended the Niners local pro day workout. He went to De La Salle, played at Notre Dame. But if you look at the Saints defensive line, under Dennis Allen. Dennis Allen's the head coach. Joe Woods is the defensive coordinator, former Niner coach. This is what they have at defensive end right now. They got Cam Jordan and Carl Granderson are their starters. Then they just signed Chase Young away from the Niners. They also have Peyton Turner. They have Tano Passigno, the former Chief. They drafted Trajan Jeffcoat out of Arkansas, who's a pretty good player. And they also have Isaiah Foskey, who was their second-round pick last year. So that's a lot of depth on defensive end. And if you could get a guy like Foskey, if you're the 49ers, man, that would be impressive. He's a 23-year-old, as I said, former second-round pick. There's no way in the world he should be worrying about his roster spot, but the Saints added Chase Young off the edge in free agency. And if you're talking about Foskey, he missed a chunk of 2023 due to injury. He played mostly on special teams when he was healthy. He hasn't proven himself at the NFL level. And, between Peyton Turner, who's a former first-round pick, and Foskey, who's a former second-round pick, there's a very good chance that one or both those guys don't make the cut. And, I think they're both too good of players to cut. I think, you probably could find, as much as there's a desire for edge rush talent in the NFL, you probably could trade Foskey. But, I could see the Niners trading for Isaiah Foskey the same way they traded for Laken Tomlinson. Tomlinson was a first-round pick, failed by Detroit out of Duke, didn't have a good start to his career. Niners traded like a 5th or 6th-round pick and got him, and he gave the Niners a couple of good years before he departed for big money in the Jets and free agency. So Isaiah Foskey's got a motor. He's about 6'5". He's got good pass rush moves. If you get him at the right weight and he's healthy, he might be better than Drake Jackson. He might be better than Robert Beal. He might be, a guy who can play for you consistently and give you a lot of snaps at defensive end. And he's only 23. So Isaiah Foskey, 1 year removed from being a second-round pick, I'd be very, very interested in Isaiah Foskey. The other defensive end that is of note is they're saying the Seahawks may cut Darrell Taylor, the former star at the University of Tennessee. Now, Darrell Taylor has been a solid player. He regressed last year to only having 5.5 sacks. They also have Boye Mafe, who's coming on. They made a very expensive free agent addition of Draymond Jones. And, cutting Taylor, potentially could be a viable option for Seattle. And, there's no dead money left on his deal. Seahawks would save $3.1 million if they do wind up cutting Darrell Taylor. Darrell Taylor can really, really hunt the quarterback and bend the edge. I like this player a lot. This guy comes firing out of his stance. Now, you look at Seattle, they run a 3-4 defense. Their edge rushers right now are Boye Mafe and Uchenna Nwosu. Those are their starting edge rushers. Then you got Derek Hall from Auburn, who was their second-round pick last year. You got Darrell Taylor, who was their second-round pick in the 2020 draft. They also got Caesar Nelson and Sundiata Anderson out of Grambling. So they have some other guys there that can, rush off the edge. And if by chance Darrell Taylor winds up getting cut, Darrell Taylor comes flying off the edge. And once again, he might be better than Drake Jackson. He might be better than Robert Beal Jr. And that's really all that matters, is if he's an upgrade, if Foskey or Darrell Taylor are upgrades, and you can add those guys, you could improve your football team pretty significantly by adding another dangerous edge rusher. And then one last name here that I think is worth throwing out, and that's Dan Moore, the offensive tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers. It was basically, Dan Moore has been, a Steelers stalwart. But they're saying that Broderick Jones is going to start at left tackle and that Moore is going to battle Troy Fautanu, their first-round draft choice, at right tackle in training camp. And so I think there's a very good chance that Fautanu, who's a really polished player, is going to beat him out. He's going to beat out Dan Moore Jr. for that right tackle spot. So, and that's the other thing. Moore's a pure left tackle. So if you ask him to play right tackle, that he's not nearly as good. Now, he's been criticized a little bit at left tackle. And I don't know if he can be that swing tackle for the Steelers, but there's a chance that Dan Moore Jr. gets cut. And once again, is he better than Jalen Moore? Is he, if there's any injury to Trent Williams, who's stepping in at left tackle for the Niners? Is it Jalen Moore? It is. And how good is Jalen Moore going to be? So Dan Moore, the Steeler offensive tackle, might be better than Jalen Moore, and he might be a guy worth taking a look at. So just some interesting names there for sure. That guys who are on the bubble, guys who potentially could get cut or traded in the month of August. And once again, just going through that list. I mean, another guy is Minnesota safety Lewis Cine, who was the first round pick out of Georgia and broke his leg, and now he's sitting like 6th on the depth chart. Cine from Minnesota is another guy I'd have interest in. So if you think about this list, so you got Lewis Cine from Minnesota, definitely a guy I would have interest in. Dan Moore, offensive tackle from Pittsburgh, definitely would have interest there. And then you've got Darrell Taylor, who's, I think, electric off the edge. I think he still hasn't played his best football. Isaiah Foskey, to me, would be a total steal if you could somehow pick him off from the Saints. Joe Notaboom, the offensive line is probably the toughest spot to find guys, because once there's such a lack of good offensive line play in the NFL that it's just really hard to find guys. But there's some, several interesting guys there. John Kaminsky, I think, is going to be an interesting player just from the standpoint he's a big-bodied guy with a high motor. He could wind up being available. Izzy Abanaconda, to me, is a really, really exciting young running back. I would definitely have some interest there. I mentioned Isaiah Hodgins from the New York Giants as a sure-handed wide receiver. He might be better than the Niners players. Richie Grant, the safety, I think could definitely help the 49ers. The Niners are very thin at safety. Richie Grant makes a lot of sense. So, we threw out, I mentioned Jeff Wilson as another guy who, the Niners are very familiar with Jeff Wilson. He was a personal favorite of Bobby T when he was here. Is it possible that he could be an answer for them? Mo Alley Cox could be a very nice backup tight end to George Kittle. McCole Hardman, if Danny Gray doesn't do it, and you look around and you're like, oh, all of our speed receivers, let's say Cowing wound up being a bust or got hurt, and you're looking around, you again don't have a deep threat. Maybe McCole Hardman's somebody that you would have interest in if you're the 49ers. So a lot of interesting names. And then, of course, Joseph Asai. I mentioned Joseph Asai from the University of Texas, for the Cincinnati Bengals. He could be a defensive end that could help the 49ers. So there's a number of guys there, but those are the ones that stand out to me. Lewis Cine, McCole Hardman, Darrell Taylor, Isaiah Foskey, John Kaminsky, Mo Alley Cox, Joe Notaboom, Dan Moore, Joseph Asai, Izzy Abanaconda, Isaiah Hodgins, Richie Grant, Jeff Wilson Jr. All those guys could wind up getting cut at the cut down. And there's a lot of good football players on that list. So, and you know what? The Niners are, they may be 1 or 2 players away. And, a lot of these guys were high picks. Just because you're a bust in one spot doesn't mean you're going to be a bust in the next spot. I mean, Laken Tomlinson was literally a bust in Detroit. He was a starting guard for the 49ers. Marshawn Lynch was literally a bust in Buffalo. He went to Seattle and had a borderline Hall of Fame career. Brett Favre wasn't doing anything if you want to go far back in Atlanta, and then suddenly he became one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time in Green Bay. Sometimes guys need a change of scenery. Sometimes they need a different location to kind of be excited about. And you know what? A lot of these guys could be great Niners. All right, hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks to Pig and a Pickle for being the title sponsor of the Krug Show. And thanks to Sharp Corner Sports Cards and Collectibles for sponsoring this video. And thanks to all you guys for supporting the Krug Show on YouTube.